So the two biggest main points is one, there will not be enough advisors in the future to support the demand that they think there will be for human
I
advice.
don't believe it.
Yeah, I know, shocking.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to From the Ground Up. I'm Zach Conway here with Kelsey McKenna. Kelsey, there's been this report, this study that we've now been talking about internally as a team for, I guess, a couple of weeks at this point. That's really interesting. I think it tells a pretty interesting kind of long-term story for the advice industry, for wealth management, and what advisors should be thinking about in the future. Give me some of the headlines of it. What are the kind of the main points we've been talking about?
Yeah, so the two biggest main points is one, there will not be enough advisors in the future to support the demand that they think there will be for human advice.
I don't believe it.
Yeah, I know, shocking. That one is less shocking, but the more shocking is that they are confirming that the demand for human advice is going up and should continue to go up based on this study. And the reason why that might be shocking, it's not shocking, I think, to people in the industry who understand the value of human advice, but it may be shocking to outsiders or people looking from an outside perspective at the industry because of the fact that it's kind of seen as like an industry ready for disruption, almost, of like maybe AI, maybe robos are finally going to figure it out with the help of AI. What's going to happen to the model that we've seen for the last however many years, the years, the numbers on when this all got started, but it's exciting. So we've been talking about it internally because we believe this, and we've always said this, that we think the human advice piece is huge and that is what the demand is for. And that these firms, a lot of firms today, there's a huge opportunity basically to do this differently and capture that demand. But what are your thoughts? You're the one that found this or originally read this and shared it with the team.
Yeah, and I should read. So it's McKinsey Company. The title of the report is "The Looming Advisor Shortage in U.S. Wealth Management." So yeah, I think like the kind of trifecta of things happening, this trend is the fact that what you just said, people have this assumption that the demand for human advice is going away. And this study, and a bunch of other studies, by the way, point out that it's not. In fact, it says the share of investors wanting holistic advice grew from 29% in 2018 to 53% in 2023. Mm-hmm. So it seems as though actually the demand for human advice is increasing. Now, when we look at stats, and these stats aren't in this report, but they're certainly elsewhere, that advisors are struggling to grow their firms organically, right? So you have what seems like this bubbling up demand. You have McKinsey saying because of that demand, there's going to be a shortage of roughly 100,000 human people, advisors, to address that demand by 2034, but advisors aren't growing. So that sort of confluence of trends, I think what we're saying is hopefully clearly an opportunity to, the types of independent firms that are trying to grow and that are planning on growing. So if the demand is there, how do you address it if there's a talent shortage? I think that's what we maybe have some ideas about how to address.
Yeah. And there's a whole side of this equation, which is about the talent acquisition problem. And we've done a whole episode on this with Jamie Hopkins. It was called Bridging the Gap. So definitely go back and listen to that if you're interested in diving deeper into that topic. But what we want to focus on today is kind of how advisors could revamp their operating system or kind of reimagine their operating system to better be able to meet this demand so that firms that are operating today can kind of rise up and serve more clients more efficiently, more effectively, and really kind of meet the needs of these consumers who are seeking human advice.
And turn it into an opportunity. I think if you just sort of boil it down to the simplest math equation, like you just said, you can either figure out how to get more people to address this demand as an industry. And like you said, Jamie Hopkins episode, that's a whole can of worms as to why that's a problem to begin with, how the industry might be actually trying to fix that, how firms individually themselves can figure out talent acquisition. Absolutely necessary. The second part of the answer is the productivity side. If you can't get more people, how do you become more efficient to be able to capture this growing demand? So I think we've kind of tried to break that down into three kind of key areas, and we're essentially stealing from this McKinsey study, so you can read their version of these points. But there's three, I think, distinct components of how do you become more productive as a firm? How do you become more efficient for the sake of trying to capture all this increasing demand? You want to get a head start, right? This is it's sort of, a little bit, I don't know, bittersweet of like the industry is struggling to keep up with this demand, but the advisors that kind of swoop in and figure this out for themselves, have a massive opportunity. So I think we have three key areas. Let's start with unpacking kind of the team structure side of things, right? How do you actually, as an organizational unit, a small advisory firm that's seeking to grow, capture this demand? I think advisors struggle with like, how are we actually set up as a business from a talent perspective and how we work together, what that basic org chart needs to look like so that you can run super efficiently and address the demand.
Yeah. So it's pretty brief in the article, but I think we could really pull this apart. So what they're recommending is essentially looking at the structure of the org and kind of almost forming service teams or small like pods so one primary advisor who is more tenured along with various support staff. And this is not a brand new idea. I have seen firms who kind of function in this way. But then what they're saying from there is to then take that and expand it out and have very specialized like resource teams almost. So when you're talking about like estate or tax or legal, those sorts of teams being their own resource that those service teams kind of draw upon instead of the advisor themselves being like the primary knowledge base of everything that has to go into the plan and investment management. And then I think one of the other points within that is within that team, you have more junior team members. So this also ties back into talent acquisition and creating career paths up into the organization that makes sense for younger people who are looking at the industry and trying to define like, what could my career path be? And they don't need to jump in and immediately own their own book. They can kind of be on a team supporting an advisor's book and then relying on resources for those more specialized topics.
I was thinking about this, regardless of this shortage over 10 years and what that clearly would mean about, hopefully the opportunity to capture more demand. We have user advisory firms of seeds who struggle with, the demand they already have and being that source of knowledge of everything, right? Like to run an independent, and this is kind of the premise of this whole podcast, to run an independent advisory firm, you're everything at the beginning. You're the salesperson. You're figuring out the marketing stuff. You are running the business, right? You are, making sure you're paying your bills and functioning as a company. You are doing the practitioner work. You're the advisor, right? You need to know all the skills across financial planning, which in and of itself is this broad, bulky idea of what services you're going to be delivering to your client. So you think across all of those areas, at some point, you're at capacity with whatever level of clients, and advisors struggle to then figure out, okay, how do I disassemble myself? How do I actually, whether it's the practitioner side, right? I can't be the one that does the deep dive on all the tax work every time with every client. So what is my resource solution for that? But that maybe you don't need to insource, but possibly outsource or co-source with other advisors. And other aspects of obviously the practitioner work and how you run the business. And I think, the coaching, we talk to advisors all the time on that topic specifically. It's like where it's two sides of the coin of like, where do you feel like you want to be in the business? What's your sort of favorite aspect of it? What your biggest skill set is? And leaning into that then becomes more efficient, right? So how do you build around yourself? And again, I would say that just is becoming that much more important if, this increasing demand across the industry continues to happen.
Yeah. So as you know, I'm working on kind of a big guide for advisors that is about unblocking or like unlocking the next level of growth and removing constraints. And one of the constraints you just talked about is that capacity constraint. So the founder is the bottleneck, the advisor is the bottleneck of the business. And once you move past that constraint, oftentimes what you run into is the team constraint, which is that now I have team members, I have kind of delegated some stuff, but maybe they're not functioning in the most optimal way.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not getting the outcomes that I desire. And I think that's a whole separate constraint. But these two things are both tied together in this one tip, because it's like kind of a game of Tetris is what we always call it internally, where you're kind of, as things are coming down the pike and as you're seeing, oh, I can afford to hire, that first hire is one tiny first step in the direction that you want to go in building this big team. And then as you're building that team, you're constantly reevaluating what you're doing versus the team and what different members of that team are doing so that you have the most optimal team to be providing the level of service that you want to provide and actually bringing your value prop to life and being efficient and making it so that you don't hate your job if you have certain parts of the business that you really enjoy. So that building around yourself, that's part of unblocking the team constraint. And also some people and leadership and management stuff that has to come into play. So there's so much that goes into this one tip, and we could spend hours on it. But I do think kind of breaking it down into those two things of like, first, you need to remove yourself as the bottleneck. And then from there, you need to level up in terms of thinking through, zooming out and thinking through, how does this team work together? And how do I hold them accountable to the outcomes that I'm seeking? So yeah, I think this is a great one. And I think this is truly like where the most innovation could happen, like tech aside, because if you don't get this right, tech cannot save you, process will not save you. You can never be the superhero that comes in and does every single thing. So this is a huge, huge piece of the puzzle.
I was going to say the things are points 2 and 3, our tips 2 and 3 may be sort of more obvious broadly to advisors and are talked about the most. And again, kind of the premise of the podcast that we think this one is the least talked about, arguably, of how do you, and last little sub tip, right? Like as you think about, okay, how do I start this process? I think what we see as advisors, it's like you're aiming at whatever like administrative, what you see as lower value stuff you don't want to do or can't do anymore because you're at capacity. So you go look for somebody who's just going to like deal with that specific thing. And I'm hiring specifically for that thing. And I think the tip is like broaden the lens to thinking 5-10 years from now of what else could that person, and again, now we're going into the talent side of the answer here that we said we wouldn't do, but what else could that person over time or on day one actually help you with across the business and have a glide path to continue to do that over time. And I think advisors, listen, it's like hard to admit and sort of give up the reins of everything as you're founding, you're the founder, you're trying to do it all and you think you're really good at doing it all and you hopefully are. But it's that audit of yourself of like beyond the little specific job rec thing I could have an operations person come in and help me with. How do I broaden the scope? What else could I give up? Because I need to plan for, not just this year, but like, what does that look like as I continue to grow?
Yeah. What are those people's career paths? Like, how are they going to grow into more responsibility? Like, where do they fit in the vision? Because ideally, you're hiring someone not just to alleviate that one thing. If you're just hiring someone to alleviate operational complexity or admin work, you might as well hire a contractor if you're not going to take the time to really look and find the right person who's going to partner with you in growing this thing. So there's so many options there, I guess, is the point. But if you are going to hire someone full time, it should be very thoughtful and very well thought out. And there should be kind of a plan in place. And obviously, it's going to change as you learn more. But
hardest to do, least talked about, I would argue. But that's the foundation. Okay, number 2, we're talking about the marketing sales side of the equation. So what has worked before? Will it work moving forward? And that sort of customer acquisition cost in the form of money, but also time and energy from the primary advisor, you're going to be at capacity. If you're spending all your time, doing whatever hand-to-hand combat version of sales today, that won't be sustainable. So how do you alleviate the sort of, sales and marketing side of the equation?
So they give some great tips here, and it's aligned with what we consistently kind of say and think and talk about at Seeds. But basically, they hint at advisors are spending 3 hours per week on what they call lead gen, which I think includes the sales process, so marketing and sales. And they're basically like, this should be removed from advisors' plates. It's also a fair point to say 3 hours is not enough if you really want to grow this. So an advisor spending 3 hours is a waste of an advisor's time because you're basically like not mastering that skill. You're not iterating and learning fast enough. So I think Do you want to say something?
Yeah. Well, sorry. Yeah. It makes me think to tie it back to the last point, you know, sales and marketing needs to become more efficient, and you're going to break that down. But it's also like, where, back to the previous point, are you, if you're spending, this is actually another study we've talked about internally, I think from Betterment, around, advisors are spending all of their time doing the practitioner work, right? They're lasered in on doing the financial planning work. And that's part of the organic growth problem also, because they're not spending enough time actually laying the foundation for how they're going to build their marketing and sales org. And
Yeah.
so you need
Well,
to
and they're
start
not
there.
learning it. You're not learning. You can't learn it fast. If you're spending 3 hours a week, you cannot learn fast enough. You cannot iterate fast enough. You can't get to know your ICP fast enough with 3 hours per week. That's
Right.
just in my opinion, if you really want to grow. So I do think this is a really good tie into the last piece, or the last point that we made. But I would say we just did a whole episode on the flywheel model, and that talked about kind of marketing to sales to success or delight phase. This is really focusing on that marketing to sales arc and saying that should be owned by people who specialize in that. That you shouldn't be using your resources who are more on the delight side of the flywheel to then be trying to make changes on the other two sides, like the beginning of the arc of the customer journey, which perfectly makes sense, like if you logically think about it. But at a lot of firms, because of the history of this industry, the advisor is seen as like the rainmaker, the advisor is seen as the salesperson. And so they often get tagged with this responsibility in job descriptions, but also just like if you're founding your own firm, you kind of assume that that's a huge part of your job until you're big enough to outsource. But you're never going to get big enough to outsource unless you establish that kind of engine of growth. So basically, there's the marketing piece, which is like, how do we get in front of people? How do we attract them? How do we capture information about them so that we can continue to drip on them and continue to provide value to them until they're ready to commit to a one-on-one interaction with us? And then there's the people who specialize in the one-on-one interaction, and on taking that person who's saying, okay, I'm going to take this risk of going one-on-one with someone at your company because I trust your company and your brand enough. Now I want to have the right person to take me through that decision-making process, that evaluation process. And then there's a handoff to the advisor. So I think ideally, those two functions are operating separately from the rest of the team. They're not part of those little team service groups.
Yeah, I think this is oversimplifying, but like you said, the primary, especially early on, is and to a large extent forever will be sort of the rainmaker. But they're very focused on just trying to scrappily get people in the boat, right? Get in front of people. And that's obviously important, and they need to be doing that. But at some point, time needs to be dedicated to thinking through what is the overarching strategy here, so that you even have a line of sight as to where you can pull yourself out, right? Maybe you are, for the next 5 years, that person that's taking the handoff. But 5 years from now, are you still the person that's doing the direct messages on LinkedIn?
Right.
And is that even a tactic you should be exploring versus other channels and tactics from a marketing perspective at all? So taking a step back out of the day-to-day rainmaker hustle of what am I doing, and do I have the right plan in place that I can iterate on and hire into as I continue to grow? And I think a lot of advisors, it's almost like you become a victim of success to a certain degree, right?
Yeah.
You have been the advisor that has done the full life cycle and been scrappy and done the tactics yourself, which is great. But then the playbook isn't defined to layer people into. And all of a sudden you're 5 years into it, and you do every webinar, you do every charity golf event, you do whatever the tactics are, it's still you, because the process is in your head, the strategy is in your head, and you are doing it all. So how do you bake out that 5-year plan and what the tactics are within it? And again, maybe you're doing it for a while, but then you know where and how to, start to hand things off and bring in other expertise.
Yeah, you do have to do it for a while to fund the hiring of these people and,
Right.
to be able to have the right moment to bring them in. One tip, I wasn't planning to do this, but it's funny because when we were prepping for this episode, all of the stuff that we're talking about is tied into the guide I'm making with constraints. So there are kind of two constraints here. There's the value prop constraint, and then there's the growth engine constraint. The value prop constraint is basically that sales, that it ties into marketing, but that sales process. So what exactly is the value prop that I am delivering to my ideal customer persona? Who is my customer persona? What do they need? What do they want? What are they seeking out in the market? And how do I, as my brand and my company, how do I communicate and say that I meet that through my brand, through my messaging, through my sales process, yada, yada, yada. That's the value prop constraint. The growth engine constraint is, now that I know that, how do I market this? How do I get an engine moving that's bringing in the right leads at the right time? So that first piece, I'm just going to give a tactical tip. You as the advisor, when you're deep in the weeds of this and you're doing scrappy sales and you're doing scrappy marketing tactics, figure out the value prop piece before you hire somebody to build the engine. Building the engine is a very specialized skill. If the value prop is not right, and I've seen this over and over, you can dump money into that engine build. You can hire amazing marketers, but you have nothing to hand over to them to go out to the market to attract and retain your people. So this is a huge thing of like order of operations and where do you invest and which constraints do you unblock first. So 100% unblock value prop first, figure that out. You're the best person to do it. You know the customers the best. You're sitting on top of the life cycle. And this is the same. This is where we are today at Seeds. You're sitting there, you're seeing every single step of the process. You're seeing which deals are going well, which are not going well. You're the right person to help define that. And marketing can massage it, but you should have a kernel of something to hand over that is very meaningful and makes perfect sense before you go dumping money into marketing. And then I think hire sales.
It's a very, very important tie-in, right? Those two things have to be happening. And I guess that it goes into my point of like being a victim of success as an advisor who has done the scrappy rainmaker, get people in the boat. Those historically are maybe more of sort of, the relationship sale. You're likable.
Yeah.
It's interesting. People, want to trust you, and you start managing money and doing planning for people. And then all of a sudden you turn around and it's like, why can't my new person repeat that? And part of it is not just what is the marketing and sales strategy, what tactics, what are we doing, how do we do it? It's what story are we telling? Is there something clear and specific and differentiated that other people could articulate in a compelling way that doesn't require, it still would always require
charming personality.
my charming personality. Hopefully, you're also have a charming personality. But yeah, that only scales so far, I guess is the point. You need to have some key messaging that address key pain points to a specific customer demographic. Multiple episodes on that topic alone. But it's a great point. Without that, there's nothing to scale. Okay, number 3. I guess my favorite. What is it?
Your favorite? I like the other two so much better than this one. This one is just like the supporting, the support.
It's the cherry on top.
Yeah. It's the foundation or the cherry. I don't know which one it is. Basically, the third one is tech and AI. So they talk in this article just a little bit about how these firms need to be using technology and using AI in the future in order to be able to support more clients, basically. So firms should be able to support more clients and still deliver amazing service, still deliver that human element using tech and AI. We have a ton of thoughts on this. So where do you want to start?
Maybe on the AI points specifically, because I think it ties back to the demand point. When we say human advice, that means engaging, deep understanding, customer-centric, holistic financial guidance driven by a human to another human. And there's a lot of AI is going to disrupt that storylines out there. And that is counter to what humans are saying about what they're seeking when it comes to advice. So when we think about how advisory firms are leveraging AI, it's not to pseudo replace anything having to do with the human side of the equation with their customers. It's to try to eliminate everything that's not that. All the stuff that is not valuable to your customer on the edges, and things like a lot of popular topics right now around like note-taking solutions and how to get data into a CRM, how to move data from different, parts of your tech stack. All the manual, squishy, time-consuming, not valuable to the customer stuff is what can be AI automated and where I think advisors should be focused on thinking about it. That's the key. Because again, to tie it back, that the people just want more of the people, right? They want more of the in the room, trusting this person deeply understands me and is connecting that to solutions for me. I don't care about, all the stuff behind the scenes. So how can AI remove the stuff behind the scenes as much as possible?
Yeah, I think that is the right place to begin, especially today with where AI is today. I do think it's worth calling out, though, that while I think the demand for human advice will increase and increase and increase, I think that there will definitely be what you see today as human advice will be replaced by kind of a supercharged version of human advice. So I can 100% imagine a day where AI is essentially obsessed with each customer within an advisor's book. So AI is tracking every interaction, every call, every note, every email, every request, and they're tracking this and they're essentially helping the advisors supercharge that experience so that that advisor has access at any moment to the entire history, any blockers, any red flags. And this is something we talk about product-wise at Seeds a lot in terms of our long-term vision, but AI and tech in general should be surfacing what the advisor needs so the advisor can go to every meeting and every touch point and every human moment can be powered by the insights across the entire journey. Think about the problem of what we were talking about before. I'm an advisor. I've had some of these relationships for 5 years, and now I want to have someone help me with this relationship. That's really hard to do. Transferring that knowledge to someone of a 5-year journey that you've taken with this client is really hard. So that person's going to struggle. You're not going to be able to alleviate that constraint as easily, or at least you never have before. And now I think we're right there. We're so close to that point of being like, I want my junior advisor to know everything about this client, because that human advice, what that means is like, I want to be able to call on your expertise in the industry and stuff and your knowledge about me and pair those things together to give me real-time engagement and advice and insights into my life and how I can navigate my financial situation and more broadly what it means about my plan and my future. Like, I get so excited about this, but I think that in general, yes, I think you should start with what you're saying, but don't rest easy because the firms that figure this out will replace you. Like if you're just sitting around being like, human advice, people want human advice and I'm a human. It's not that simple. They want more human advice, but how do you give more human advice to more people more quickly, more effectively, more efficiently? And that's where I think AI comes in.
It is the other side of that coin. So how do you remove what's not human? Right. How do you get rid of the tedious, boring stuff the client doesn't see? And how do you supercharge the humanness stuff? So a primary advisor, to try to bring an example to life, a primary advisor has a 10-year relationship with a client. And there's so much that's in the CRM, but not quite in the CRM. In other words, what is the family dynamics that, maybe is written in a paragraph, but unless you had a conversation and that advisor could really download to a junior advisor what's going on and why and the backstory, and how that ties into why an estate plan was done a certain way, you need to be able to serve up the nuance of humanness and connect all that information to action and a way to position things and a way to tell a story to that client moving forward that can't just come out of the primary advisor's head when that advisor remembers it, right? This is assuming that they can just, always click back to the 10 years of human stuff in their brain on all those conversations. So how do you take all that humanness and then help advisors surface that information in a way that makes that conversation that much more human? I remember these issues. I know how this ties to this. And now I have a system that's telling me to make this point in this moment because it's actually going to land with them because of all those reasons behind the scenes.
Yeah. It's turning like the reactive, very proactive in a way that is just a dream to me from a client. As a client experience nerd, it is like a dream to me because like I can imagine a time where in the future where advisors are being served up opportunities to drive value proactively. There's all sorts of studies about how these clients, like they're working with advisors, they don't even hear from their advisor for like 6 months. There's no touch point, or they're sending just like a market update and they're broadly blasting it to everybody. I want to see I want a world where something happens in the news, something happens in a portfolio, something happens in their plan, or something changes in their life, and the advisor is being proactively served like a layup or like a alley-oop, right? They're being served this moment to just really come in and be like, I know you and I'm paying attention, and here you go. I want to connect about this. And just the amount of value compared to the way it works today is just crazy. The difference between the model today and what that could look like is just an amazing opportunity.
Well, and spoiler alert, this is, the thesis of what we're building at Seeds. So I always think of like a review meeting. There's a lot to cover, but when you get to the investment management side of the story and what the portfolio is doing and how it's aligning with goals and so on, if you have a junior advisor and you have sort of like hey, we do these 3 reports, you go through these points, you show these charts, and you call it a day, that is not landing with the consumer on the other side. That is such a transactional, it creates mistrust moment where what if that story could actually be shaped around what you figured out about that person and how they think about investing 10 years prior, and had a system to capture that nuance that then informed those interactions around the portfolio through the whole life cycle of the relationship. And that's what creates the humanness, right? I think that there's just like this intuition with all of us, but in the advisory space of like technology is actually going to remove my qualitative connectedness with my client. And the whole point is technology, at least like Seeds, we're trying, it's the goal is to do the opposite, right? How do you bring it more centered around who that person is, as opposed to, whatever you say the talking points are in every review meeting for every client.
Yeah. And you just touched on what I was going to bring up. So my 5th constraint in my constraint guide that I'm making is the operational complexity constraint. And this constraint is very much tied to tech and process, and AI plays a huge part of this. But basically, I think one thing to think about as you think about the other things we talked about is as you are understanding your ideal customer persona and as you are refining your value prop and then working to deliver that in a way that is meaningful to the client, operational complexity quickly becomes the problem. Because if you're doing this right, you will find that to deliver that human advice, there's a lot of need for personalization. There's a lot of need for variation within your client relationships. And this is where I think everything we're talking about really comes into play to kind of remove that constraint. The one thing I will say on this, though, is that it has to be going well before you start to optimize.
Right.
And you can evaluate vendors, and you should be evaluating vendors with kind of your vision in mind, because sometimes there are tools out there, like Seeds is an example of this, that can really be a game changer in how you even think about your process, because they're thinking about process and they're thinking about tech in a way that is different from the rest of the industry. So it's totally valid to be looking at tech providers, but I think you have to know what you are generally aiming at and generally what should your process be before you start layering tech into it. Because if you just acquire tech, your process is going to be driven by the tech and not by what the customer needs and what your team needs to operate efficiently. And that's, I think, the biggest pothole that I see in when firms are trying to address this issue is they're really kind of haphazardly trying to remove the operational complexity or reduce it without a really clear understanding of what levers they can pull and when and what it's going to drive within their business. So they can't even be strategic about how they go about pulling those levers, if that makes sense.
Yes. And, the premise of Seeds, why we started the company, was the audit of like tech should serve the connective tissue of the customer experience across time. In other words, like when we looked at how the investment management journey between human advisor, human client, from moment I meet this person to hopefully they become a client, and then, I'm in a review meeting a year later with them, was a mess. And there were so many different technology components that didn't speak to each other across that whole life cycle. And our internal processes were so inefficient. So to your point, without auditing, why are these the steps across time? It was hard to even analyze and understand where the tech was actually failing us. So when we zoomed out and said, okay, here's what that intro assessment meeting experience should look like when it comes to the portfolio. And here's what the proposal moment in an optimal customer-centric experience could be. Here's what implementation could be if we, abstracted from the status quo. Here's what it could/should be. Here's what a review meeting talking about the portfolio could be. That was the moment of, okay, now tech, and we had to build it from the beginning, but how could technology actually connect all of those dots across time? So I think that's it, right? Like the audit of the process, how does tech actually serve the process across time? And the stuff we touched on with essentially more humanness at scale. The stuff that people value and that they are demanding is that qualitative, conversational, deep understanding connected to the right solutions stuff. But you need systems in place to actually enable you as your own advisor to do it more and to obviously bring in more team members who can do it effectively as well. So we covered a lot.
That was a lot. We tried to keep it tight, so thanks for hanging in there. Any last thoughts on this?
No, I think what's exciting, I said like bittersweet earlier. I guess like what I mean is I'm excited that there are firms that, many of which we talk to daily, that are at the precipice here. They are the ones that are actually going to achieve, take advantage of this opportunity. So it's a bummer that the shortage exists for the sort of talent reasons. Other episode, Jamie Hopkins, go watch that. But again, the advisors that recognize this as an opportunity, it's hard. There's a lot to figure out. Those 3 areas we covered, we think are the sort of foundational things to start with. But I think advisors in general should be pretty excited that, all this noise that demand for us is going away is just patently untrue. So I think that's kind of the takeaway. It's really exciting that there's more people who want more time with advisors, and you can figure out how to address that.
Yep, that's why I'm here. I'm excited. It's not bittersweet for me. It's like all sweet. I'm just so excited. When I work with the firms that we've been working with, and I see the potential and how well they're serving their current customer and how much opportunity there is to just scale that up, it's just like so exciting for me.
And in truth, this is what we're talking to advisors every day about. So if you want to have a conversation like that, come check out Seeds, www.seedsinvestor.com. We'll see you guys next time.